transaction, you should be spending at least 2 hours looking through it. But it's not going to be 2 hours where you listen to my voice, because you can read, and I'm not going to be one of those presenters that simply reads off everything that you're perfectly capable of reading yourself. You're going to get a little bit of guidance from me through the videos that is accompanied with these attachments, 3 of them in total. And you're going to see a little bit of that layered approach I talk about, where you have an increasing amount of detail. So I'm going to give you a little bit of guidance through these videos, just to explain what these documents are about. You already have some idea, and it's a Chrome OR transaction, and you'll just need to read these documents over and over again. Don't be afraid if it's a little bit intimidating, and also don't worry about the repetition on my part. It's important that you get used to it, because finance is actually very common sense. There's very little in finance that's going to stretch your brain. What you mostly need is familiarity. And that's why you'll see me repeat points about the same transaction from time to time. So if you open the first attachment, what that is normally the summary. Sometimes it's called a teaser in the corporate finance world. That just says this is what the basic deal is about. And a deal, as I'm sure you've picked up, is a loan on the one side if you're on the borrower's side, and is an investment on the other side. It's 2 sides of the same coin. And in the first attachment, we normally just summarize the deal in very, very basic terms, and often we literally use pictures. So you say what the amount is, the regions it's operating in, the currency, and you list the basic terms of the deal, as you'll see in the executive summary. And then diagrammatically, what you often do is represent the flow of the transaction, which in this case starts with Chrome OR in Johannesburg. If you know anything about Chrome OR, it's literally a bunch of little black rocks. It's a great commodity, in fact, to finance. It's bulky, it's hard to transport, it's hard for it to go missing. It's of no real value. It's not like, say, copper tubing or copper wire, which is a nightmare to finance, because it's got extremely high theft value. It's the equivalent of stealing cash, because copper is that liquid in the sense that you can turn it into money in 5 seconds. Chrome OR is a commodity that I really do like, because it's got value to the right buyer. So yes, you can turn it into money, but you've got to move it in huge quantities. And it can be assayed. So that simply means that you get some company, usually a company who specializes in this, to tell you both the quantity and the quality, the grade of the ore. In this case, it was moving from Johannesburg to Durban, and once it was inside the Durban port facility in some form of bonded warehouse, where it was under the custodian of a collateral management agency. I don't know if you remember that term, CMA as it's called in the industry. That's just simply somebody looking after the collateral. It's a third party that both the lender and the borrower agree will have custody of the collateral. So if something goes wrong, you can pick up the telephone as the lender and say, I want my Chrome OR sent to this place where I'll get cash from it. And you'll see that we've listed in the diagram that there's a 45-day delay as the warehouse is filled up, and in order to get the stock ready. And then as the ship sails, there's a letter of credit that gets activated, gets paid in about 2 weeks. So you're looking at a 60-day trading cycle. And then you'll see the various terms below. You can read through that, and you'll pick up that this is really in many ways a repetition of what I've already told you, but you're just seeing the same information presented in a different format. This is normally the format that goes to the fund that says, hey, can you tell us in basic terms, are you interested? Does this meet your criteria? And in almost all cases, you've already been told in advance by the fund what their criteria are, and so you know which deal to take to which fund. And there's nothing earth-shattering there, but just be warned, it takes time to get familiar with it. You'll find you'll go through a miraculous in inverted commas learning process where as you read through these documents and you sleep on it, you'll become increasingly comfortable with the terms, with the format, so that when you see another one, it looks like familiar territory and you can actually start entering into conversations about it. The second attachment, which will look like literally a PowerPoint diagram, that's also a common way of presenting a transaction. Often it's included with the teaser, and you're just diagrammatically representing the flow of the transaction. Many funds enjoy this. It's not my personal favorite. I like pictures, but it really just presents the same information in a flow chart in terms of presenting the trading cycle, and when of course the money drops in, and it normally is accompanied by a rough outline of the terms, and you'll find 2 pages in that PowerPoint. And of course, like I said, I'm not going to bore you by giving you a video about something that you're perfectly capable of reading yourself. When it comes to the third transaction, this is more of an idea of the lengths you need to go to in order to get finance approval. So this document is exactly the document we used to get this $10 million deal approved. I've changed nothing other than, of course, remove the names. I haven't even bothered to correct for spelling errors or anything like that. It's just what you're seeing is the naked truth in terms of what it took to get this deal approved. It's a relatively simple transaction. Like I said, chrome ore is one of the easier commodities to finance because there's a whole bunch of risk you don't need to think about. You know, when it comes to risks around, like I said, things like copper, we have to do a lot more work when we do a copper transaction, especially around the insurance. And there's certain regions where copper is, the black market for copper is so ugly and so rife, we wouldn't even go near it, just because it's too messy. And so this is a relatively simple transaction. We'll share more transactions with you where there's a lot more pages involved. But normally you start off again with there's some kind of executive summary. I know it seems like there's just executive summaries everywhere, but remember, these things happen in stages. Normally you'd want an initial phase of a transaction where there's some kind of, you'll hear the terms approval in principle. It's very commonly used. And that you would normally do on the basis of a teaser, maybe financials attached, where everybody just agrees in principle we want to do this deal. That approval in principle is normally subject to a due diligence. Now, due diligence normally means that you've interacted with the client, maybe 1 or 2 meetings in person, and you've done, often it happens over Skype or some sort of video conferencing. And now everyone has agreed that between the fund manager, between yourselves, between the client, that we're going to do this deal. And these are the terms on which we're going to do this deal, and the client gets asked to commit to the terms. And now you need to do the deal subject to due diligence. Due diligence simply means that everything is as the client says it is. And that's a bit of work. Often you're jumping on a plane to go visit the client's premises, to go visit the place where your collateral is going to be stored, just to physically look at everything with with your own eyes, and then $10 million is $10 million. It's a proper amount of money. So there were a few flights involved in this transaction. Often you would ask your client to pay you a small fee. Normally it's not an extra fee, it's an advance on the future fees, because you're actually not spending money, and if the deal fails, if it's the client's fault, there was something they didn't disclose, or some risk they didn't make us aware of, then we don't want to then having picked up expenses. So it's quite common for the client, after he signs an approval and principal letter, a term sheet, to be told to pay a small fee. And then that gets followed up, like I said, with the due diligence visits, and then that would normally lead to a document like this. This would normally be the final document that gets produced after you've done management meetings and site visits, and now you flesh out the deal in a lot more detail, and you do an assessment on the transaction, the trading cycle, and you include the transactional flow chart that I showed you earlier on, and you'll even see a few photographs that will tell you exactly what chrome ore looks like, exactly what sort of containers they get stored in, and you'll be able to see what the sealing mechanisms looks like, just to make sure that the stock doesn't get tampered with, and all the little protection mechanisms that gets put in place. In a case like this, like I said, it's not an incredibly high risk item from a theft point of view. So the little bits of seals that you and custodianship work that you see photographs of and a description of, that's enough for a transaction like this. We describe the client's business structure in terms of, it's usually a complicated set of onshore companies and offshore companies and trusts. It's just kind of how these transactions work, and of course you'll see a market review in terms of just listing the condition of the market at large in terms of this particular commodity, and this gets put in a file. It's actually an auditable document, so that if in terms of the regulations and the corporate policies that funds work with, they have to have a file that says this is how we approve the deal, so that if ever they are questioned about how responsible were they with the investors' money, there's a paper trail of this is how we assess the transaction, this is the detail at which we looked, and that gets stored in paper or in paper or electronic files. So all this document is quite important. It doesn't. Finance seldom gets done just on the basis of a verbal meeting. The verbal meeting does happen, it's important, it's often where the real decision making actually happens and the real questions get asked. When I say verbal meeting, I mean the committee meeting that you'll want to be a part of. But the flow of information and decision making has to be documented. It's most often a regulatory requirement that there's a paper trail of how the decision was made, because you're dealing with an investor's money. An investor has the right to, at a later stage, ask you how the decision was justified, especially if something goes sour. So have a read through that document, make sure you understand it. I would initially suggest you just read through it. Just go through it once. And just read through. Don't worry about the things that you have to go back on. Finance is something that takes getting used to. More than half the learning is just getting used to it, as opposed to learning anything particularly earth-shattering. Just the parts to draw your attention to. If you remember the early lectures, one of the things I made much of was fears of loss. Okay, and this document is just really addressing fears of loss. And the one fear of loss that I warned you would spend 80% of your time on, even though it sometimes may not necessarily be the most important fear of loss, but it's going to cost you 80% of your time, and that is the cash flow fear of loss. that's simply justifying the question, how secure and how liquid is the cash that is going to repay us? In practice, that's where the time gets spent. The stuff around the borrower's reputation, that kind of gets listed as, yeah, we take it for granted that the borrower's got a good reputation. Tell us a little bit about the borrower and the company and the people behind it. It's important, it's crucial, it's more important than anything else. It just doesn't in practice take up the time. The real time gets taken up by cash flow. Now, in this transaction, you'll see headings that refer to exit. That's just another term for cash flow. Exit simply means, how is the lender, how's the fund going to exit the loan? And you exit a loan when it gets repaid, when cash comes in. So you'll see that there is quite a lot of energy devoted to this exit strategy, as it's often referred to. And don't be deceived by the fact that it's only taking up about one page. It is crucial. It is the heart of this application. And when you have conversations, when this document gets put on a boardroom table and you're having discussions about it, that's where the conversation goes to. A couple of questions around the borrower, the background, the revenue, but then the focus is, let's look at that exit strategy. And so you'll see that we very carefully had to detail 3 exit strategies. So you have a primary exit, so that means what's the main way you're going to get out of the deal if something goes sour. And the brevity is to make it clear. The brevity shouldn't suggest to you that it's unimportant. And the primary exit in this transaction is the sale. So all we're really doing there is fleshing out a little bit how secure the sale is. It's a sale that is backed by a letter of credit, and then we talk a little bit about the bank, just to make sure that the fund realizes that this transaction is backed by a bank. There's no discussion about how secure is the buyer, will the buyer pay, won't they pay. The bank's standing behind it, so we talk a little bit about the quality of the bank. The secondary exit is covering the thought that what happens in the highly unlikely event that something so weird goes wrong with the buyer that the bank doesn't pay, and now you're sitting with the stock, and now you have to find another buyer. And that's all that is about. We are saying to the funder, hey, don't worry, we've got a buyer. It's secured by a letter of credit. But if something weird happens, we can find another buyer. So therefore, we talk about the fact that this particular borrower has got a total of 15 different off-takers, 15 different people he can sell to. He's already doing business with them. He can just take the same stock and divert it to another one of his clients. And then there's a tertiary exit. And tertiary exit is just the third way in which we are saying to the funder that if something totally weird happens, the buyer falls through, his bank goes under, and the second buyer has similar problems, or we divert the stock to the second buyer and it gets stolen, or there's a nuclear bomb going off in the ocean somewhere, that there's a third way, and the third way of recovering the money, the third exit, is we turn to the borrower's personal guarantee. So that is just us trying to satisfy the fear of loss. And every other part of this paper is really just trying to address that point. Even something as simple as a collateral management agent. We're simply saying to the fund, relax, don't worry, there is a trusted collateral management agent. They've got an insurance policy covering their professional indemnity, and you don't have to worry about stock going missing. You don't have to allow this transaction to remind you of that other deal that you went through that went sour, or that other deal that you heard of that went sour, because deals do go sour. I mean, these guys are not dumb, so you've got to address those fears because they are real. So enjoy this section of the course.